I don't hear anything. Nothing? Oh, we're on. Oh, on the mic is. Is the volume down maybe? Oh, no, but we checked that. How about now? I'm not hearing anything. How about now? Nope.
It was working last night.
It always is, right? How about now? Nope. Not hearing anything. Interesting.
How about now?
How about now? Nope. Oh, there we go. I can hear it over on the one to my right.
So now we just got to turn up the volume. I think. So you said the one on the right you heard?
Yeah, I can hear myself through that one. Ooh, ooh, there we go.
That's because we have mics pointed at speakers. What happens if we turn on too much? Put this one down. And that one. Let's test this one.
Everything should work. Yeah, we're getting there. Can you hear me over there? One, two. How about now? There's a gremlin that's dealing with my stuff for classroom. I don't know who it is or what it is. But somebody's doing it.
Oh, I see
So
what
now
you're saying.
that, right,
They have
so,
questions.
yeah.
I think we're all good.
Good evening. Gosh. Please grab a seat and grab some food, or grab some food and grab a seat. We're going to start shortly. Can you move up to the front too? Okay, can you hear me? I don't have to scream anymore. Great. Um, Good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, and community members. My name is Nguyệt Nguyen. I teach history at the Department of Social Sciences at UAS. As the organizer of the Waging Peace in Vietnam exhibit, I am incredibly grateful that the University of Alaska Southeast, especially the School of Arts and Sciences, enthusiastically endorsed the effort to bring the exhibit to campus. Dean Karen Silkaitis and Administrative Officer Beverly Keefe were instrumental in this process, and I would like to express my deepest gratitude to them. I would like to thank Egan Library staff members for their support. Among them, I can't thank Jonas Lamb, enough for his hours of work, helping with the outreach effort and making sure the space was ready, the panels were up, and the student contest ran as smoothly as planned. I would also like to sincerely thank Kenny Campbell at the Chancellor's Office, Jesse Goodman at the Writing Center, Colleen James at the Native and Rural Student Center, Susie Vollmer at the School of Arts and Sciences, Creative Manager Alison Krein, Chair, and faculty members of the Departments of Social Sciences, and staff members of the Veteran Club and the Physical Plant, and many students and employees on campus who helped make this event possible. Many sincere thanks also to the Veterans for Peace, Juneau chapter, for their support. Now I would like to invite Vice Chancellor Michael Siri to the stage to welcome all of you to the event.
Thank you, Professor Nguyen. I am not Chancellor Karen Carey. The Chancellor would love to be here tonight, but she is flying back from Fairbanks. Our Board of Regents was meeting for the past 2 days, but she's very aware of this event and very supportive. For those of you who are not a part of our campus community, from the larger community from out of state, welcome to the Egan Library. We're very proud of this facility and really proud to have this exhibit here in the heart of our campus. Our campus is in the heart of the land of the Aquan people here, and it's really worth noting that this is Tlingit Ani, and the Tlingit people have been stewards here for over 10,000 years. And for those of you who are not part of our community, who are visitors, just know that we really value that connection. These are their unceded lands, and our campus is richer for being headquartered here. I did want to, in addition to thanking the faculty and everybody for putting this on, I just wanted to make a personal note. I've been looking at this exhibit going up, and I was just explaining it's causing me to think back on my own childhood. It is very personally meaningful to me, and I am a bit overwhelmed with the idea that we would be able to have this exhibit here. My father was in the Air Force. My mother was deeply involved in the peace movement. And I really feel like this exhibit captures kind of both halves of my heritage. My mother is not with us anymore, but were she, I know that she would be sitting in this audience right alongside all of you. And so with that, I want to introduce Provost Maren Havig to the stage. The podium is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us to the exhibit opening of Waging Peace in Vietnam, the story of U.S. soldiers and veterans who opposed the war. The Vietnam War ended 5 decades ago and left many legacies, among which that over 50,000 American troops died in Vietnam, and also several million Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians died. The trauma from that war lingers, and we won't be able to move on without critically and honestly examining the war from many perspectives. We won't be able to move on unless we acknowledge how the war started, unfolded, and ended. We also need to come to terms with the long-lasting socioeconomic, mental, physical, and environmental consequences of the war, which many Americans and Indo-Chinese are still dealing with. The University of Alaska Southeast, bringing the Waging Peace to Vietnam exhibit to Juneau, is part of that effort to help us examine and reconcile with the past. Before this exhibit, I knew little about the powerful GI movement against the war. I didn't know that there were at least 4 underground anti-war newspapers published by GIs at U.S. military bases in Alaska. There was also a Native American paper by soldiers at Fort Lewis in Tacoma, Washington. While a bit south of Seattle, it spoke for indigenous GIs, many of whom came from Alaska. It is remarkable that those men and women in uniform risk their career and sometimes their lives going against what they believed to be unjust and unjustifiable. It is important to acknowledge that their struggles played an important role in shaping the outcome of that war. Excuse me, an army would not be able to fight if its own soldiers resisted orders or deserted. I was surprised to learn that the U.S. government was worried that its military was falling apart because of the GI anti-war movement. I am inspired by their remarkable courage and resilience, and I believe that many who visit this exhibit will also be surprised and inspired as I am. I am very glad this exhibit is now at UAS. The exhibit will be up from today through December 15th, and it's open to the public. During this time, there will be many accompanying events, all which are also open to the public. I encourage you to come to the panel discussion tomorrow at 1 p.m., which will also be live streamed, or the poetry reading, film screening, and symposium in early December. Once again, thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Ron Carver is an author, labor rights and social justice activist, and photographer. Since the early 1960s, he has fought for civil rights and anti-war movements in the United States, Vietnam, and around the world. He is currently an associate fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. The day Ron Carver graduated high school, he joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and in 1968, he participated in Columbia University anti-war protests. During this time, he also coordinated support for the GI anti-war movement, helping soldiers tell their stories in underground newspapers. In 2016, he met museum director Ms. Huỳnh Ngọc Vân during a visit to Vietnam's War Remnants Museum, and the two collaborated to launch an exhibit about U.S. soldiers and veterans who opposed the war, which is what you are now seeing around you. We are honored to have him here with us today. He is going to read some poems written by the anti-war GIs. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Ron Carver.
Thank you, Nwit, and thanks for those of you here in person and those who are watching this live streamed. It's an honor for me to be here. What a beautiful community and what a beautiful campus. And I'm almost in tears in gratitude for the warm reception and support I've received at this university. I want to read to you the dedication of the companion book, which will be available afterwards, which is the same spirit in which I agreed to curate this exhibit, and I'll be brief. I dedicate the book and the exhibit to the millions on both sides, killed, maimed, and morally injured by the bullets, bombs, and chemical weapons unleashed during our war in Vietnam. And for the people of conscience, now and into the future, who have the courage to stand against unjust war. This is the 15th university where we have, in the United States, where we have brought this exhibit on tour. And we try to open every panel discussion or presentation with a few poems by poets, Vietnam veteran poets. And it's interesting because there was discussion at the Veterans Center event just a few minutes ago about the trauma that military service, and particularly service in the war, can bring to those who serve. And it's important to think about that. And the two poems I'm reading by two Vietnam veterans, I have to tell you, I know these people. They have, back on the East Coast, spoken and read these poems themselves. And like so many veterans, they suffered through 10 years of addiction and trauma before they were able to become productive. Both of these people serve as university professors, and you'll understand why in a minute. The first one is called Protest, and if you look at that panel there, you'll see a veteran, one of 800 veterans who converged on the U.S. Capitol peacefully on April 23rd, 1971. The war was still raging, and they felt so betrayed by the leaders of our country sending them to a war that they found out when they got there wasn't what they had signed up for, that they took their medals, their Purple Hearts and their other medals, and threw them over onto the steps of the Capitol. Jan Barry, the poet who wrote this poem called Protest, has these words. Regarding the latest bombing that destroyed a friendly village, here's my medal of good conduct. For yet another operation that devastated so many lives, here are my campaign ribbons. If that is not enough, I'll protest until my death this murderous madness. It's Jan Barry from New Jersey, a good friend of Susan Schnall's. Here's one by W.D. Earhart, a poet, lives in Pennsylvania, professor there, talking about, well, he's talking about the trauma to Vietnamese, but if you listen carefully, you'll hear his own trauma. It's called Making the Children Behave. Do they think of me now in those strange Asian villages where nothing ever seemed quite human but myself and my few grim friends moving through them, hunched in lines? When they tell stories to their children of the evil that awaits misbehavior, is it me they conjure? Thank you.
Before I introduce the next speaker, I would just like to say that we have an opportunity to talk to our speakers today after the speech. So I just wanted to remind people that of that opportunity. So Susan Schnall is president of the National Board of Veterans for Peace. As a Navy lieutenant, Ms. Schnall was court-martialed and sentenced to 6 months hard labor for leading the October 1968 Peace March in San Francisco. A professor at NYU, she organizes panels on the chemical weapons the U.S. used in Vietnam at the American Health Association's annual meetings. We are very honored to have Ms. Schnall with us today. Please join me to welcome to the stage Ms. Susan Schnall.
Good evening, and thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you, Nguyen Nguyen, for being so persistent in making sure that I came here. November 11, 2022 is Remembrance Day 105, 104 years since World War I was ended in Europe at 11 o'clock on the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. In many parts of the world, the day is called Remembrance Day, a day of mourning the dead with a commitment to abolish war. In the United States, the day is called Veterans Day and is celebrated with parades of armored tanks and military troops parading to cheers of those onlookers. We in Veterans for Peace are working to reclaim Armistice Day and remind all of the true cost of war: lost lives of children, men, women, civilians, destruction of the environment, and all living things. We believe that Armistice Day is a day to mourn all victims and rededicate ourselves to end war. Thank you. It is an honor to be here and be a part of this commemoration, and also to be able to reunite with people with whom I have worked and organized these past 50 years, for whom I feel deep admiration and respect, for those GIs and veterans who returned from war and armed conflict to work for peace and social justice in this country. For them, it's been a wrenching, painful journey from war maker to peacemaker, to be able to question both themselves and their country that participated in an unjust, immoral conflict, to be able to look at their adolescent selves and question their very identity, to take a moral journey back to a time when they were in a country thousands of miles away from United States borders, members of a military that were killing and destroying the people and land in Southeast Asia. Those once young American Vietnam soldiers have become old men and live with the memory of what they did so many years ago. And I should say, and women, because I include myself in that category. We don't want to be thanked for our service. We want to be forgiven. The soldiers have returned from that introspection and critical self-analysis, remembering the past and healing themselves through current work for peace and justice. Quote, "Our nation has not yet used its vast resources of power to end the long night of poverty, racism, and man's inhumanity to man. I am disappointed with our failure to deal positively and forthrightly with the triple evils of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. We are presently moving down a dead-end road that can lead to national disaster." End quote. These are the words of Dr. Martin Luther King over 50 years ago as he spoke about the war in Vietnam and the Poor People's Campaign. Dr. King was denounced by other civil rights leaders, by the press, by the public, that wanted to know what gave him the expertise to talk about international politics. In 1967, a peace march was led by GIs in Madison, in Cleveland, in Atlanta, Fort Benning, Georgia, Fort Jackson, and I'm going to reiterate to many of the names of these military bases that you will see on the posters that Ron Carver has put together. There were pray-ins, there were teach-ins, there were numbers of GIs participating in an anti-war rally in Philadelphia. In October 1967, 4 sailors deserted from the USS Intrepid and fled to Sweden. GI coffee houses were started over primarily the southeastern part of this country. 1968 began with the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. The NLF, the National Liberation Front, attacking 110 cities and provinces in the south. The North Vietnamese Army encircling Marine troops at Khe Sanh. And I should just mention that 5 years ago, I attended a dinner where Mr. Ring was one of the commanders of the North Vietnamese Army at Khe Sanh, and we had troops from Veterans for Peace and Vietnam veterans against the war who were sitting together at the same table talking about their recollection of war so many years ago. At the same time, there were national card burnings across the country. The assassination of Dr. King, after his Beyond Vietnam speech. Federal troops were sent to Chicago. Columbia University, which Ron Carver knows well, was the uprising against the Defense Department contracting. 200,000 high school students boycotted their classes. There were refusals, ongoing refusals of military troops to be deployed both to the Chicago National Convention and to be deployed overseas. General Westmoreland requested additional troops as the Paris peace talks began. He said it was just a matter of getting enough manpower to be able to be successful, as he termed it, in Vietnam. The Catonsville Nine were found guilty of destruction of selective service files and sentenced to prison. In 1968, 43 soldiers from Fort Hood refused orders to go to Chicago during the Democratic National Convention, where they would be used to repress peace demonstrators. Active duty soldiers protested in Vietnam. From the summer of 1967 through June 1969, I was a Navy nurse at Oak Knoll Hospital in Oakland, California. I was assigned to surgical and orthopedic wards. They were World War II barracks, crowded with 35 to 40 patients, all young men who had been wounded in Vietnam. They were very young, 17, 18, 19 years old. Some were missing limbs. Some were so shot up, they had tubes coming out from various parts of their body, draining excess fluids. One 18-year-old guy, clean cut, he was on his way to surgery for a foot amputation, was so terribly frightened and crying. I grabbed a hold of his stretcher as he was being wheeled to the operating room and asked him, as nurses do, "Talk to me. What is it that you're so frightened of?" He said he was scared of dying, and as we started to talk, the doctors pulled away the gurney and said they didn't understand why he would be so scared to have his foot amputated. After all, it was only his foot. They had seen so much worse on other soldiers. He was chilled and shaking as they moved his bed out and down the ramps to the operating room, and his death. And I couldn't protect him from the war, from his fear of dying, from death. It was at night that cries and screams of pain and fear would start on those long, open wards. Each unit, a wooden shack holding 40 steel-framed, old-fashioned hospital beds, filled with wounded young men. At night, the lights would be turned off so they could sleep and dream their nightmares of war, of dead and dying buddies, rotting in the dense growth of jungle in this faraway country called Vietnam. These youngsters would scream out their agony. My leg, it's been blown away. Be careful, there's a tripwire in the grass. Agonizing cries and panic yells. I'm in pain, nurse. Give me something for the pain. I can't take it. The cacophony would start at one end of the long unit and be carried by the next man-child. I told you I need something for this pain. Their limbs would be held aloft by butcher-like hooks, used to elevate a leg or arm with large open wounds oozing infection. Pus and blood mixed together in stumps that would always remind them of their war and loss. This was 1967, 1968, during the height of the American war in Vietnam. I watched the battles on TV and lived the war at work. I was against this terrible destruction and waste, and yet I had become a part of it. I had a responsibility to act and work with others to stop the war. And as a member of the armed forces, it was imperative to inform the American people that there were active duty GIs who were also against the conflict in Southeast Asia, that we supported the troops by wanting to bring them home alive. In 1968, I knew that I could no longer be silent. I was working with a group organizing the GI and Veterans March for Peace to be held in San Francisco on October 12th. We had difficulty distributing the flyers on military bases. We put up posters about the march in the middle of the night. They would be torn down the next day, as you can imagine, on military bases. From the news, I learned that the United States Air Force dropped leaflets on the Vietnamese in South and Central Vietnam, urging them to go to, quote, protective hamlets to avoid the bombings. And I thought, well, if the United States could drop flyers for war in a country 8,000 miles away, then why couldn't we drop flyers against the war on the United States? I had a friend who was a pilot. We rented a one-engine plane and filled it with flyers announcing the GI and Veterans March for Peace. And we dropped them on 5 military bases in the San Francisco Bay Area. Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, where I was working, Treasure Island, Yerba Buena Island, the Presidio, and then we flew into Alameda Naval Air Station and dropped them on the deck of the USS Ranger aircraft carrier. We held a press conference afterwards where I spoke to the press in my uniform. 2 days later, I marched in uniform and spoke out against the war in Vietnam, against this dirty, filthy war, and supporting the troops by bringing them home alive. It is so many years ago, since the spring of 1969, and though I almost remember the name of the corpsman to whom I was speaking, I can distinctly set our discussion about the war to be in the middle of the day, walking around the grounds of the old Oak Knoll Hospital complex. We had worked together when I first arrived, and he was a very smart, very dedicated hospital corpsman. I just cannot remember his name. We all thought that he had somehow escaped being given orders to Vietnam. Now he was married and had a baby. He was promoted to psychiatric technician. We believed he'd been forgotten until he received his orders overseas. It was after my court-martial, and I had raised money to pay attorneys for the guys who refused their orders. I spoke with him about his not going and told him we'd cover his legal fees. We had been successful before. But he was quiet and calm and resolute as he told me he had to go. I asked about his family, and he smiled and shook his head. It was his duty. He couldn't give it to someone else. He had been lucky in not having to go earlier. I didn't have any arguments other than the personal. The political ones would have been meaningless to him at that time. So he went to Vietnam and died when his helicopter was shot down during a rescue attempt of wounded soldiers. I've always wondered what else I could have said that afternoon that might have made him change his mind. What could I have told him that would have preserved his life? I wonder how his wife and baby lived their lives without him. There is another corpsman from that time whose name should also be on the Vietnam Memorial Wall. He died many years after we left Oak Knoll from prostate cancer caused by his exposure to Agent Orange when he was a corpsman in Vietnam. Tim Schock came back to Oak Knoll from the war and quickly became active with our anti-war group. He asked for copies of the paper we called the Underground Oak to hand out. He came to our meetings and participated in peace demonstrations. He was a handsome, dark-haired, smiling, yet serious young man. He was one of my favorites. He was always dedicated and caring to our soldier patients and to peace. I left Oak Knoll in June of 1969 and maintained contact with very few people after I moved to New York. And then we reconnected in 2010. I met Tim and his wife Eileen in Oakland, California. He had matured, of course, and gotten older, with gray hair, a slight paunch, but that same ingratiating smile that I remembered. He showed me pictures of his son, who could have been Tim in 1969. We talked about life since the Navy, and he told me about his anti-war work, and he told me about his prostate cancer and his exposure to Agent Orange. He was convinced that he had it under control. Tim Schock's name doesn't appear on the wall. His death will never be recognized related to his service in Southeast Asia. He passed away in 2015. His last email to me dated December 2014. I have had a tough summer and fall battling stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer. It's in the bone, and I am on a chemo regimen right now. Scary stuff, exhausting. Of course, there's no give up in me. I chug along trying to get the most out of my life as I can. In every country and every culture, we believe that our children are our future. Our children are to be loved, treasured, cared for. As adults, we take that responsibility as the most important work we do in life. It is our nature to protect our children from harm. We watch over them when they're ill. We cry with them when they're in pain. We protect them from those who would harm them. How do we prevent hurt from an unseen enemy, from something we carry in our bodies and transmit to them unknowingly? The dioxin in Agent Orange not only impacts the lives of those who were in Vietnam during the American War, causing deteriorating illnesses and death, but it can also be transmitted to children by causing changes in cells that last multiple generations, causing birth defects and problems for the children and the grandchildren directly exposed. The legacy of that conflict continues with the birth of babies born from the use of Agent Orange over 57 years ago. Babies who never volunteered for the military, who never held a gun or dropped a bomb, whose parents were in southern Vietnam, and who became the target for this chemical herbicide. And let me just include American troops as well as Vietnamese and Southeast Asians. We leave many toxic elements behind after a war. In Vietnam, we left poison in the land and the people. Hey, America, listen to us. We were the soldiers you sent to Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Iraq, Afghanistan, Okinawa, Japan, Korea, Niger, Syria. We joined the military because we believed your lies about preserving democracy and freedom. Some of us learned through experience that we were told lies. Some of us learned from the truth tellers, like Julian Assange with the release of Collateral Murder, a video that revealed the cold-blooded, deliberate murder of Iraqi civilians, the deliberate attack on Iraqi children that was filmed from a US military helicopter as it blasted to pieces 2 reporters from Reuters, 9 other men, and seriously wounded the children. Hey, America, listen to us. We should be honoring the people who reveal the truth to us, who launched the foremost global enemy of state secrecy, not torturing them to death in British prisons to face espionage allegations from the United States. Through television and social media, we are witness to the antipathy and I would say ignorance of the American public as wars rage at home towards those in poor communities and people of color. We are incited by news organizations like the New York Times that constantly blast accounts of the war in Ukraine, as though it were a football game, leading the cheering section of revelers. Let me tell you, as a veteran who cared for soldiers during the American war in Vietnam, war injures all who participate. It kills the body and soul. It damages communities and families. It impacts generations. And who profits? The war industry, the merchants of death that produce and distribute armaments. It drains our social resources that are life-sustaining, our education, healthcare, social services, housing, and uses those resources for death and destruction. And we continue to go on with our lives, overwhelmed by the enormity of the changes and the problems facing us. Hey, America, listen to us. Listen to the voice of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Contrary to popular belief, conventional wisdom would have one believe that it is insane to resist this, the mightiest of empires. But what history really shows is that today's empire is tomorrow's ashes, that nothing lasts forever, and that to not resist is to acquiesce in your own oppression. The greatest form of sanity that anyone can exercise is to resist that force that is trying to repress, oppress, and fight down the human spirit. We who know the truth have a responsibility to share it with others, to organize, to lead the way toward a sustainable future. War and militarism are destroying the planet. Veterans for Peace, Climate Crisis, and Militarism Project is part of the worldwide movement to end the climate crisis and promote climate, environmental, racial, and economic justice. The media, itself an arm of mega-corporate power, feeds the fear industry so that people are primed like pumps to support wars on rumor, innuendo, and lies. Hey, America, wake up and listen to us. We are at war in this country, on this land. We are killing our children. We have become the monster in the world that produces more armaments, more battleships, more drones that annihilate whole communities with the push of a button. We destroy our young. We kill school children with impunity. We poison our water and food supply. We give the wealthy everything, great economic wealth and political power, so they can grab more opportunities for power and money, while we starve the poor, denigrate them with substandard housing, substandard education, lack of decent job opportunities, and then offer a way out by joining the military. We arm police departments with military weapons that destroy and kill. No trial necessary for the poor and disadvantaged. And yet, we send our military might all over the world and use it against people of color here. America, what have we become? How did we become immune to the dead children in Texas, in Florida, Chicago, and Parkland, killed by gun violence? How did we become immune to school children killed by guns produced in America, by gunmen produced in America? We export our military violence to the highest bidder. America, we supply the arms used to kill school children in Yemen. We target them, their school buses. We starve the children in Syria as we starve the children in Venezuela. America, we look for wars as the outlets for our munitions industry. We perpetuate violence in the Middle East. We starve, imprison, attack children in Gaza and the Palestinian children on the West Bank. We have become the greatest purveyors of violence in the world today. But we are Veterans for Peace, Vietnam veterans against the war. We say no more war. Listen to Elie Wiesel. Quote, "The greatest evil in the world is not anger or hatred, but indifference." Before this generation goes on to its ancestors, we must do our level best to pass on our lessons so that they live in our people's minds and lives. And that's from Mumia Abu-Jamal. Today, I think of those lives changed forever by war and conflict, and along with millions of others, rededicate myself to healing the wounds of war, to working for peace and social justice, to bringing an end to armed conflict, to move us from a war economy to a peace economy, to care for all those harmed, and to stop this insanity called war, to end corporate power and destruction, to instead be life-giving instead of death-giving. For if we who have known war don't dedicate ourselves to ending it, who will? Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I recognize that it's not easy, or it's not easy to have few out-of-state guests to be here. It doesn't happen very often. So I would like to take this opportunity to give the audience a chance to interact with our guests. So if you would like to ask a question, make a comment, this is your chance. This is our time to have a little discussion. So if you would like to do so, I would like you, when the mic, wait for the mic to come to you, and then identify yourself. Oh, there, it works. Sorry. So would you like to have a question? Yeah.
I guess, thank you very much. That was powerful. I guess I would be interested in hearing from where do you draw hope?
From a group that comes to attend and watch and see the project that has been put together of work that's been done over the years, of people I work with. As you know, I work with Veterans for Peace, and it is extraordinary to me that folks, men and women who have been to war and participated in it, can look to themselves and say, I can do something about this, I can change, and I can change the world, and continue to work for peace and social justice. It still is extraordinary when I think about it. So I draw hope from them. I drew hope from my students. I taught at NYU for about 25 years in health management and policy management. And I draw hope from people I worked with in New York City public hospitals, because they cared so much about the patients and about making sure they were well cared for. So I see it all around me. Do I have hope in politicians? Do I have hope in our current economic structure? No. I think that it has to change. It will change, because people, and I still believe that people can make that change, that people coming to this kind of an event will think, hopefully, and understand that part of my discussion is very personal. It's also very political. And I share with you what I've experienced over, I'm not going to tell you exactly how many years, but many years. And I've seen the very best of people. And as you heard from the corpsmen I worked with, to people I worked with in public hospitals, to my students, and to you all. So I'm just going to say that's my encouragement. There's lots to be done, and it can be done. I know that you have very active community organizations in Juneau. It is the climate crisis. It is other organizations on peace. Even though I might not agree with Mike Wong and all of his positions on China, but I've known Mike for years, and it is extraordinary that his politics are a reflection of his humanity and his involvement with the community. And that, I think, is what can become a driver for all of us.
Not to disagree with you in regard to politics, but in our country, which, if you look at the present divide, so much is based on ignorance and unwillingness to learn and inconvenient truth. For instance, the history professor just handed me the microphone. We don't very often teach history here. We cherry pick a great deal. My point, where I'm trying to get to anyway, politics, we often avoid discussion. Oh, well, that's politics. Hate isn't politics. Pretending you follow a religion while living a life in the antithesis of what you claim isn't politics. Environment and whatever you believe about oil, fracking, without aquifers we don't drink. That's not politics. We can make the excuse all we want, and we can blame politicians all we want, but the reality is, who elects the politicians? If they don't follow a code, if they don't follow their word, if they act immorally, it's ultimately up to us. We can vote out of convenience or for power, but it's not politics, it's humanity. We either do it or we don't. Did that make sense?
I would agree with you. It's not necessarily all politics, it's our economic structure. And I would suggest that in our country, the economic structure decides who is in political power. So however you want to talk about this, it's economics, it's the war industry, it's those who have power over the economics. And I would suggest the fracking, the oil industry, all of that, the war industry that gets stronger and stronger and stronger. We can work on that. We can make changes as we did, as Ron talked about, as we did during that period of time where the United States was involved in war in Southeast Asia. And I think part of what happens is we get into our own little huddle in our own world because everything is just overwhelming. So we can make change. You can make actually political changes. You can get together in your community. You can decide who you're going to vote for. You can decide you're not going to buy certain products, and you're going to encourage your community and others to do that. So I would suggest whatever name you want to give it, the important thing to remember is that unless we make changes in this world and in this country, what do you see for the future? There have to be changes.
We concur. I was just trying to make the point that avoiding inconvenient conversations by being able to label it whatever.
And I would agree, we need to have those conversations. Yes.
Thank you. Before we go to the next question, I would like to remind you that there are books up there, and the curator would be available afterwards to talk about the book and the exhibit in general. And also there's an event that happens at 1 p.m. tomorrow. Dave Noon, where are you, Dave? Over there. Professor Dave Noon is going to moderate that, that discussion at 1 p.m. tomorrow. So I just want to plug that before we go to the next person.
We are so lucky to have you here visiting us. Thank you for coming. I want to hear what you think are like 3 or 4 organizing tactics that you've seen work over the years, or what your favorite organizing stories are for the inspiring events that you were sharing, and then also just the collecting of stories, I guess, too, is part of that through the poetry. But I was really inspired by the story about the plane leafleting. That's a pretty different way to do that.
Thank you. Right, it was obvious to me that our message wasn't getting out. And again, it was not, I feel like it was not all that creative. I took it from the Vietnamese and from what the United States was doing. And some of you may also know that Richard Nixon, when he was running for governor of California, dropped pink flyers on California, claiming, right, that his opponent, Helen Cahagan Douglas, was a communist. So that had been used for a while. And I learned when I went on a peace-speaking tour of Japan that, in fact, the United States dropped flyers over Tokyo urging the residents to leave because they said they were going to be destroying the city. Of course, there was no place for people to go. So organizing, it is really meeting with people and talking and sharing ideas and identifying what you want to work on. It was easy when I was in the military. You know, it was because everybody was around me and we were talking about the war and what we could do. When I was summarily dismissed, I began working in the GI coffee houses. I think, Ron, you have some photographs of the GI coffee houses that were places primarily in the southeastern part of the US next to military bases where active duty military would go to hang out and have an alternative space to work. So for me, organizing is meeting with people and talking with people. I am not equipped to even begin to discuss social media, but I think it's people getting together and deciding what you're going to work on. So my question to you all is, what are you working on in Juneau? Please tell us, because that's what I think is important. Yeah.
I brought this poster, and I have a stack of them in my office, and it said, "Honor the troops, mourn the dead in the war." And then I think back, which war was this? And I say, we're still at war. And we're still mourning the dead, and we're honoring the troops. And that could be the troops in here. So I have a stack of these, and I wish somebody would take them. Jim Fowler, a local artist, did it. And it's a beautiful piece of artwork. And it, KJ Metcalf. The Cold War. And our chapter is working on a number of things, but we are focused right now on making the Arctic a nuclear weapons-free zone.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And I'll mention one of the other projects that I've been working on for years is called the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief Responsibility Campaign. We're an organization that was formed by both veterans and civilians who are active in the peace and social justice movement. And we have a sister organization in Vietnam called VAVA. We worked together to try to heal the wounds of war. It began with a legal suit by Vietnamese nationals against the chemical companies that produced Agent Orange dioxin. We lost in the courts, and so we have since gone to the House of Representatives. And if you are interested and would like, please support the legislation. It's H.R. 3518. It is called the Victims of Agent Orange Relief Act, and it seeks to take care of all those who have been harmed by the United States' use of Agent Orange in Vietnam. Those who have not been given any kind of relief include the children of American male veterans. There's only one diagnosis that is recognized for them. It's spina bifida. The children of American female veterans, on the other hand, have had every birth defect that the child is born with recognized and given benefits through the VA. We have not ever recognized that we have a responsibility to take care of the Vietnamese we harmed through the use of chemicals in Southeast Asia. So we are working to educate people, and again, we're a group of American civilians and veterans working with a Vietnamese organization to heal the wounds and to talk about bringing former enemies together to work on this project. It's another start. But I'm sure, I know you all are working on other projects. Right, I'm sorry, Elaine. We've just spent so much time talking and I've been learning about this. So.
Well, thanks for asking what other projects, social justice, environmental justice programs we could get involved in. And we're hosting Susan, and we've had a long time a lot of time to talk, and we found out that Veterans for Peace has a project on climate change because they articulate so beautifully how war destroys our climate and its contribution to fossil fuel emissions. So if you're interested in working on climate change, I'm co-chair of 350 Juneau Climate Action for Alaska, and we're an activist group. We have a board. You may have noticed the last 2 summers we've put on an event called Climate Fair for a Cool Planet at the Whale, and we work together with Theater Alaska, and we are also working on defunding the fossil fuel industry. Okay, one bank, one insurance company, one permanent fund, and one retirement fund, Alaska State Retirement Fund, at a time by divestment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to respond to Michael Siri's question about what keeps us going despite all of the challenges we face. And I want to say that I hope people leave here feeling inspired and not depressed, because the reason that I originally took on this job of putting together this exhibit, and I've kept going at it for 6 years, taking it to 15 different campuses across the country, is because I find it an inspiring story. The story of the resistance and the effectiveness of the resistance, the success that the soldiers had in ending the war. And I mentioned this at the smaller gathering with the Veterans Club here a short while ago. But what I say to students at every campus around the country is since during this war, and this was a horrendous war that went on for 10 years, from 1965 to 1975, the soldiers and sailors and Marines and the Air Force personnel who persisted and built a movement so large that by 1971, President Nixon felt he had to withdraw the troops. I mean, think about what that meant. And think how improbable it felt at that time that people could do that. We have pictures here of 1,000 active duty soldiers outside of Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas, marching for peace 2 years in a row. We had on the West Coast in Oceanside, California, 1,000 Marines, active duty Marines, marching for peace. The numbers were enormous, literally hundreds of thousands. And I say to people, if soldiers and sailors in the midst of a war, a horrendous war, in uniform and operating under the very repressive military justice system could build a movement so robust as to bring that war to an end, well, there's no problems that we face that should be daunting, that you should feel is daunting. And so I want people to go away from this meeting tonight and go away from watching this and go away from purchasing and reading the companion book. I want people to feel inspired, to feel hopeful, because it is a hopeful sign. And there is no problem. They don't all end quickly, but we can do it, and we can do it together. So thank you. Well, if there are no other questions, then people can have some more food. They can come up. They can talk to Susan, myself, to Mike Wong, who's here from San Francisco, to John Kent. So we can do that, but did you want to? I saw a persistent hand. What a great hand that is, too.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kaylee. I am a UAS staff member, and I work with recruiting students. So I'm curious, since the theme I'm sensing is like a remembrance. How do you recruit students to keep taking courses on this? And how do you speak to students for, future endeavors?
Well, isn't it significant that this university has the great historians and political scientists, and just recruited this summer Professor Nguyen Nguyen, who I've known now for 3 years. Met her when she was teaching at American University in Washington, D.C. You're doing a great job. I mean, you have the resources. What a great place to be working. Access to students. You can give them hope. You can give them knowledge. And I'm not just saying give them, but they can too. I started my active involvement, I guess Nwit mentioned, the day after I graduated high school, and I went down to Georgia and then Mississippi to work in the civil rights movement at a time when Mississippi was like a foreign nation. I was there 2 weeks when 3 civil rights workers were lynched, people my age, by a Klan posse that was organized by the deputy sheriff who arrested them on the bogus charge of speeding. It was a terrible time, and it was a wonderful time. And I got to work with great people from that community who rose up at great risk to themselves. And that's another inspiring story. The fact that Susan Schnall did what she did with the risk that she took in being court-martialed and sentenced to 6 months hard labor, that Dr. Howard Levy in that picture, 3 months before his time at Fort Jackson, training Green Berets in how to use medicine to wage war, decided he could no longer take it and was sentenced to 3 years in Leavenworth. Inspiring stories. When he went into Leavenworth, there were 500 prisoners. When he left 2.5 years later, the prison, there were 1,500. The place was teeming with resistors. Every army-based stockade was filled with resistors. That's on top of the 30 to 50,000 who joined Mike Wong in Canada. I mean, the fact that not only were there 2 Russian men who took a small boat across to Alaska to avoid serving in what they saw was a horrible incursion in Ukraine, there are over 300,000 other Russians who have recently left. And one of the things that some of us are doing is we're encouraging our country, and David Courtwright, the co-editor with me, along with Barbara Doherty, the companion book, has just come back from a trip to Europe where he met with peace activists there who are asking their countries to offer asylum to Russian soldiers, learning from this example of this country when Canada opened its borders to U.S. Men fleeing both the draft and fleeing the military service after they were in the service. These are all things that can help end war. So there are a lot of creative things folks can do. I'm not at all sad. I'm not at all oppressed. I'm inspired every day. I feel great. I think there's great hope for us. There are great challenges, but there's great hope.
I'm going to get back to a question, which is how to recruit. Wasn't that your question? How to recruit students to come. So and there certainly are ways to do that. There are courses in history. You can have veterans and GIs come and speak and offer that as part of a program. Oral history, right? And I keep saying, some of us get invitations to high school and colleges, and I about Ron's exhibit, right? Hear us now, because we're not going to be around forever. So you can hear the original stories. And maybe that's a new and inventive way of having a course. Hear the people who made the history, who might have made the difference. And Vietnam, certainly that was my era. You teach literature, talk about the things they carried, and talk about what it was like, both in literature and in real life, to be called into a war. So there are history courses and literature courses, and I would just say, certainly in my part, there are healthcare courses and health management courses, all of which can be taught to students. The program I worked in at NYU brought in people who were working in the field. So that's something else. Who's working in healthcare in Juneau? What do they have to teach students from their own experience, as well as teaching all of the information that you need to be a successful healthcare manager or social worker or nurse. So again, lots of different ways to do that and bring students in. And it doesn't just have to be young students. You've got hospitals and healthcare facilities here. In New York, NYU is affiliated with New York University. So the students are currently working in healthcare, but want to get their degree or want to get their graduate degree. All different sorts of programs that you could have here. Just a suggestion.
Don't have any more. Sorry, if we don't have any more questions, I think we have come to conclusion. Please don't forget that we have another event tomorrow at 1 p.m. in the Glacier View Room. Details, scan the QR code. Thank you very much.
I didn't get a chance to get here before the 5 o'clock started, so I got a chance to say hi.